Hi guys, so for this week we have our first set of course readings that is coming from the textbook, and it's going to be a little more like what we're going to be doing throughout the semester, where we'll have some kind of short piece of fiction, like today. For this week it's King of the Bingo Game by Ralph Ellison, and then one or two poems that relate in topic or theme somehow to the short story. There are some weeks we will do different things than that. We are reading a novel over the course of 2 weeks. We're reading 3 plays over the course of the semester. Some of those we will have a poem that accompanies them, some we won't. But for the most part, this is the kind of way that our readings will kind of be progressing. So I'm going to actually do 2 videos just because it would have been very long to try to do one over all 3 of the readings. So I'm just going to start this video on King of the Bingo Game. I'll mention, I'll explain the response activity that you guys need to do for this week as relates to King of the Bingo Game. I'll explain that at the end of this video. And then I will also have the other video in which I go over the poetry and the response activity for those 2 readings. So, starting with King of the Bingo Game by Ralph Ellison, I'm going to be looking down occasionally because I do have my textbook here, and I'll flip through it just to get some particular quotes or particular instances from the story that I'm trying to look at. So, King of the Bingo Game by Ralph Ellison is set in Harlem, but it's set in Harlem kind of after the height of the Harlem Renaissance. So just very quickly, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with what the Harlem Renaissance is, but just in case, it's a time period in mostly the 1920s, during which African American culture and intellectualism and scientific thought and music and literature and other arts was being explored, defined, and celebrated in Harlem in New York. So this is a time when we have just a huge group of people defining and explaining and kind of artistically expressing, or intellectually through essays and things like that, expressing what it means to be African American and what some of the triumphs and also some of the troubles of being African American are at that point in time. So during the Harlem Renaissance, Harlem is definitely, it's a hotbed of lots of activity, lots of great creative thought, lots of great scientific thought, lots of intellectual thought and development. And as the Renaissance kind of falls off, you have the people who were so highly involved moving on, living different places, obviously the older ones, some of them dying. You have kind of the heat of the movement just kind of slowing and also just kind of spreading, so that rather than have this hotbed in Harlem, you have different areas all throughout the country. And the only reason I mention any of that is because it is important to remember that the Harlem that this story is taking place in is not the Harlem of the Renaissance. It's the Harlem post-Renaissance. And so what we have going on in the story, of course, is a young man is having a hard time getting a job, and he is trying to play a bingo game in order to get some money to help his wife, woman, whatever we want to call her, Laura, who is apparently sick in some way and needs a doctor, and he needs money. We see that he's not in any way unwilling to work. He's tried to work, but he's been told he can't get a job because he doesn't have a birth certificate. And so that has led him to this as kind of his last resort for a way to be able to get money, is to play this bingo game in hopes that he can win this jackpot that will give him enough money to get Laura a doctor, get her whatever medicine, get some food, get a month or 2 or a few weeks of rent paid wherever they're staying, and that's pretty much all that money would do. It would help the immediate problems, but it wouldn't fix anything ultimately. So that being kind of just the outline of where this story starts, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the critiques of American culture that Ellison is giving us and showing us through this story. So we start out and we have our main character watching a movie because apparently this bingo game is in a movie theater. That sounds kind of weird to us, but this is something that up through the 50s even was pretty common, that in addition to showing movies, there was a lot more that went on at movie theaters. Going to a movie, particularly on a weekend, could be a day-long event. There were newsreels and cartoons and serials like that would be shown, one episode this week, one episode next week. There were live performers and there were games sometimes like this bingo game. And so he's at the movie for the purpose of playing the bingo game. And when the bingo game does start, as it turns out, he wins, in that he has his 5 in a row on his bingo card. So what most of us would be accustomed to meaning he has won bingo. Well, this means he's won the chance to go on the stage and spin this wheel. And if this wheel then lands on the right number, then he wins. So we see a system of, here's a game that has a jackpot that is offering some amount of hope to the people who are playing, people like our main character who desperately need the money. But there are so many hoops to jump through to get to that money that it seems unlikely anyone ever wins it. It's not that it's impossible. Sure, someone's maybe won occasionally, but it's very unlikely. And that is, in a lot of ways, representative of some problems with American society that Ellison is looking at here. So particularly, we're in a time period when there are more and more social programs that are developing. And by social programs, I mean things like what have turned into things like housing assistance and Medicare and food stamps and programs like that for people who are working, for people who just, for whatever reason in their circumstances, are not able to fully make ends meet on their own. These programs to offer assistance so that they can work, so that they can try to, spend some of their time not working and better whatever it is they need to better their education, their training in a particular field, whatever, to get a better job or move into a better situation or whatever it is. So these programs are starting, and that's great, but people who need them are often not really told about them. So we take our main character here, who could clearly benefit from any of those programs, some kind of housing assistance, some medical care for his wife. We're going to call her his wife. It's easier than just calling her Laura every time. So, and obviously some food stamps probably wouldn't hurt either, so that he could get some groceries, so that he could not have to worry about being hungry, as we see he is. Those are all things he could get some help from. But he doesn't seem to know that those are things he can get help with. And the reason is because, yeah, the stuff's available, but if no one tells the people who need the help that the help exists, then it's not really helpful. And so that's kind of, again, representative of what we have here, that sure, maybe he could have access to those things, but the steps he'd have to go through to get that access, first off, are unknown to him, and second off, are unreasonable, and so he's not going to be able to get access to those things. The mere fact that he can't get a job because he doesn't have a birth certificate is another example of this. So he doesn't have a birth certificate. He was born in the rural South, most likely at home, and most people in that situation would not have a birth certificate. And therefore, he would have been able to work at home because most people wouldn't have had a birth certificate. It wouldn't have been a requirement. He's moved up to the city to try to have more opportunities, and he actually finds out that because he doesn't have this document that no one ever told him about, he can't get work. Now, are there ways to go about getting a birth certificate or a replacement type of identification that would allow him to work? Absolutely. Has anyone told him that? Absolutely not. So we see there yet another problem that, okay, so he's trying to better himself, but he's not being allowed to because of a hoop to jump through that he didn't even know existed. So those are just a couple of the highlights of how we see these things playing out in the story, and then the bingo game is just mirroring them for us. So ultimately, we have him playing the game, winning the right to spin the wheel, and he has a plan. And his plan is to spin the wheel just for a second, because from all of the watching he's done, that's the most likely for him to win this jackpot. But then he gets up there and he gets this button in his hand that when he holds the button down, the wheel spins. When he lets go of the button, it will stop spinning. But as soon as he has control over something in the world, he cannot let it go. And I think it's very easy for us to see why he cannot let that go. He has control over absolutely nothing else in the world. He can't get a job, though he's trying to. He can't get money, though he's trying to. He can't take care of Laura, though he's trying to. And it's very easy for us to see, therefore, how helpless and out of control he would feel. And so I can personally imagine being that helpless and seeing everything in the world going on around me, and I have nothing I can do to have any kind of effect on any of it. And all of a sudden, I'm given this one tiny thing that is completely under my control. That would be incredibly intoxicating and very easy to fall under the spell of. So that's definitely a big part of what's going on with why he does not let go of the button. He's finally in control. And as he thinks about being in control, he thinks about everything that has been going on in his life. And by holding down the button, it's kind of freezing time for him. So when he holds down the button, Laura is alive. He knows that because when he started holding down the button, Laura was alive. So for him, in that moment, everything's okay. But once he lets go of the button, he gives up all his control again, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. And at that moment, he will have to deal with the possibility of Laura dying, of Laura getting worse, or of other problems. And so he doesn't. He holds on to that button with all he has within him. Until he is stopped from holding the button, forcibly stopped by some men in uniform who come in. We don't know who these men in uniform are. They could simply be theater employees. They could be police officers. They could be military men who happen to be watching the movie or playing the game or something. Sorry. We don't know. We just know they're in uniform. And they eventually stomp on his hand to the point that he has to release the button. It just happens. He doesn't willingly let go. And as it turns out, after all that, it lands on the 00, which was the number it was supposed to land on for him to get the jackpot. And so he's like, there, see, I told you I was trying to do it my way. And if you let me do it my way, I could win. And there it is. And the men who have just stopped him are saying, yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. But what he doesn't see is them wink at each other. He sees the curtain, or he doesn't see the curtain go down very quickly so that they are now hidden from the audience. And I said I would look down occasionally. I'm grabbing the textbook right now now I have to flip to the very last page. Sorry, give me a second. I had it there, but pages. All right. So yeah, just read the last paragraph. But as he warmed to the justice of the man's tight smile, he did not see the man's slow wink, nor see the bow-legged man behind him step clear of the swiftly descending curtain and set himself for a blow, meaning get ready to hit someone. He only felt the dull pain exploding in his skull, and he knew even as it slipped out of him that his luck had run out on the stage. So this ending is particularly poignant, particularly relevant to this social criticism I was talking about, in that we now have an example of someone who has successfully jumped through all the hoops and completed all the ridiculous steps that he was kind of finding out were steps he had to complete. And he's done it all, just like he was supposed to. And he still isn't going to get his jackpot. It's still not happening. At best, he's going to get beaten and let go. At worst, he is being murdered for no good reason. I don't guess there's really a good reason for murder. So yeah, he's being murdered. And he's not going to be okay. Laura's not going to be okay. And it's all because he followed the rules, but he didn't do it just the way the men running the game wanted him to do it. So he still doesn't get the prize that he was promised. So I think it's pretty easy to see where the social commentary comes into this story, that what we're seeing here is one specific picture of injustice in society, and particularly what we have to think of with this story is that the owners of places like this movie theater in Harlem would, under most circumstances at this time period, have been white men. We know that our main character is a young Black man, and we see that as long as the young Black man is doing what the white man tells him to do and is cooperating, everything's fine. But as soon as he does something his own way or steps out of line or whatever the runner of the bingo game would call it, he is immediately, swiftly, very unjustly punished. So this is a story written in 1944 that in a lot of ways, very unfortunately, could be written today. And I try to open our course with some stories like this, or like the lottery, that makes us look at challenging tradition that's there simply for tradition's sake, even when it's not good for the majority of the country. I try to have us start this not to be depressed that these things were written so long ago and they still apply, but to remind us that we can't just sit idly by and be these other people in the bingo game watching and even beginning to yell at him on the stage and tell him to stop. Or the people who just go ahead and stone Tessie, even though they had been talking about the possibility of getting rid of the lottery earlier, who are not willing to rock the boat because it doesn't directly affect them. That's not something that anyone in our society has the luxury to do right now. And I know that for the most part, I am telling you that, and you already know that. But it's a reminder on my part that we do have a responsibility to our fellow human beings to speak up when we see something wrong and to do what we can to try to fix it. So that's kind of just a very quick overview. I obviously didn't go over largely the section where we have this psychological deep dive into what he's thinking and what he's doing. That's not that it's not an important part of the story, but I can't make these videos, an hour long and have you guys trying to watch these every week, and I understand that. So I just wanted to hit on some of those major points. So now to get to the response activity for this story, what I would like you guys to do is imagine that you were going to cast a movie of this story. and what actors would you cast and why? So certainly we want to know who you'd cast as the main character. That's the most important part here. Um, who is an actor who you think would do a good job in that role and why? Um, you'd want to cast the man running the bingo game, perhaps the men who are who finally get him to stop. Laura's not actually in the movie or in the story, but she could be in the movie in some kind of, flashback scene if you feel like casting Laura. But just largely make sure you cast our main character, so our king of the bingo game, and the man who's running the game, and any other characters you'd like to go ahead and cast. So yeah, just tell me, what actor would you put in that role and why? Do you think because you saw them in this other movie, they do a good job here? What is your reason that you would choose that person? So a little more creative inspired than creatively, I suppose, inspired than just some discussion questions. I will try to make things a little different from week to week, just so it's a little more interesting for us. So again, your response activity here is to tell me who you would cast in a film version of King of the Bingo Game. So that's what you will submit to the assignment based on this video, is your cast list and why you have chosen them. Again, you'll also still need to go check out the video on the 2 poems on Sympathy by Paul Laurence Dunbar and Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. Those videos will be, or that video will be shorter than this one. Those are shorter readings. But thank you for getting through this one. I hope you enjoyed the story. It is one I like very much, not because it's a happy story, but because it's a good story, because it's an important story. So I do hope you enjoyed it, and I guess I will see you again when you watch the poetry video. So thanks.